As I'm sure you've heard, you can't believe everything you see on the internet. So I decided to round up some of the worst software engineering advice I've seen to tell you what not to do. Let's get into it. This is a piece of advice I remember following in high school and early college because I thought there was a direct correlation between expertise and how many languages you knew. The truth is, a lot of design patterns and coding mechanisms are pretty language agnostic, which means learning them really well in one language will serve you a lot better than learning the basics of 10 languages. And deciding to go deep and really studying one or maybe a handful of languages is going to give you a much better bang for your buck than going really broad and studying a little bit of many different languages. You probably won't really use most of the languages that you learn, and all of your knowledge in them will be really shallow because you haven't learned that much of the language, compared to if you go really deep into one language, you're going to learn how to write really good code and how to design systems, and those skills are going to be easy to transfer to another language if whatever work you're doing requires that. So in summary, especially when you're first getting started, focus on really learning the fundamentals and how to write code in one particular language. It's much better to have actual deep knowledge of one language than just having a really surface level understanding of a whole bunch of different languages. It's the equivalent of writing something substantial versus writing 10 different versions of Hello World. So I'll begin by saying if you're first getting started and you're brand new to coding, then this advice is probably okay. But for anyone who's trying to go a little bit deeper and has a bit more experience, as soon as you start trying to productize code or worrying about efficiency, then you really need to know what's going on under the covers. And for me, there was a pretty long time where all I really cared about was just getting the code working. That's still my first priority, but when you're new to coding, it's probably the only thing you care about. And it wasn't really until the past couple of years, especially once I started pushing code to production, that I started really focusing on writing code the correct way. Even when on the surface two implementations appear to do the exact same thing, there's still a lot you need to consider, whether it's maintainability, performance, or code safety. If you don't understand what's really going on in the code, you won't be able to make the correct decision between which one of those implementations you should actually be taking, or if you should not be taking either of those implementations because there's actually another better way of doing what you're trying to do. And this can also help you a lot when it comes to debugging. Instead of just relying on knowing the basics of a language and the abstractions that they built on top of these building blocks that are what's actually going on, you know what's actually going on. So when something is misbehaving, you have a good idea of where to look and why something isn't doing what it's supposed to be doing. If you're new to coding, don't worry about this yet. There's plenty of time to learn that later, but in the long run, your code will be much better if you understand the fundamentals that a language is built on top of, instead of only the high-level usage. Number of lines of code gets thrown around a lot as a metric, with different interpretations depending on your perspective. Some people brag about how much work they did because they wrote a lot of lines of code. More code equals more work equals better program. Other people want to show off the complete opposite thing, just how few lines of code their program uses, squishing everything down into a handful of lines to make something that's as condensed as possible. It seems obvious, but stop caring about lines of code and start focusing on the quality of that code. In some cases, minimizing lines of code isn't a good thing. You shouldn't just be choosing the most concise implementation if it really isn't the best tool for the problem you're trying to solve. Also, you shouldn't be compromising on readability by doing this. If you're trying to cram a lot of things onto one line that should really be on 2 or 3 lines, then that's not a good thing. And you also shouldn't be trying to bolster your lines of code to make it seem like you did more work or like that work was more complicated. You should be using existing implementations via libraries instead of writing things from scratch. You should be limiting code duplication so that you're not copy pasting things all over the place, and you should be trying to make things just overall as readable and digestible as possible. More lines of code also just means more places for bugs to sneak in, which means more debugging when inevitably something does go wrong. We generally don't judge which books are the best based off of how long or how short they are, and the same logic applies to code. We shouldn't really be deciding which programs are the best because they take a lot of lines or not a lot of lines. We should really just be evaluating them based off of the quality of the code itself. Alright, if you enjoyed that video and you want to see more like it, then consider subscribing if you haven't already. I really appreciate it. Anyways, that's it. Thanks so much for watching, and I will catch you guys in the next one.